It's a normal night at Luke Skywalker's Jedi Temple on Ossus. Ben Solo lies asleep in his hut, and his uncle Luke Skywalker enters. Looking into his nephew's mind, Luke saw that, quote, Snoke had already turned his heart. Luke saw that Ben had turned to the dark side, and thought he could stop it. He ignites his lightsaber over his sleeping nephew, and when Ben wakes up and sees this, he summons his own saber, ignites it too, and strikes at Luke, bringing down the entire hut, destroying Luke's temple and effectively ending the new Jedi Order. This is what happens in the final flashback in 2017's The Last Jedi, the third of 3 that show the same event as described in 3 different ways. And boy, is this plot point controversial. I'd say it's probably the most controversial thing that happens in the sequel trilogy, aside from the return of Palpatine in Episode 9. And because it's so controversial, I'm just gonna ask up front, even if you disagree with what I'm gonna say or what I'm trying to do, please hear me out. I'd love to hear your opinion after you've watched the whole video. People hate what Luke did here, igniting his saber over his sleeping nephew. They claim that he would never do that, but I think what Luke did is completely understandable within the established story, and more importantly, within Luke's previous original trilogy and even expanded universe characterization. But proving that requires a few different points. Firstly, getting it out of the way, the first 2 flashbacks, and especially the second one, are from totally unreliable narrators. Let's take a look at how this happens. In the original flashback, we see an establishing shot of the temple and a shot of Luke, no lightsaber, with Ben's hand extending into frame, pulling the hut down. This is followed by the extended sequence of Luke emerging from the ruins and approaching R2-D2 and the burning husk of his temple. This is Luke's whitewashing of events, as he's telling Rey about it for the first time, clearly informed by his shame. Next up is Ben's version of the story. This one begins on Ben's face and clearly frames Luke's actions as wrong, making Ben a victim of Luke who's jealous of his power. The saber is out here and Luke's face is dark and his eyes are sullen. Luke looks evil in Ben's eyes, and he clearly begins the strike himself, swinging at Ben, who raises his saber in self-defense and pulls the roof down in the same way. I must clarify that these 2 flashbacks, while admittedly breaking the standard visual storytelling language of Star Wars, are not what actually happened. I can't tell you how many times I've seen folks using the image of Luke from the second flashback, this one, looking decrepit and evil, as a representation of how the film actually depicts Luke to be. No, this is how Ben manipulatively described him, shown from the visual point of view of an unreliable narrator. Now that that's out of the way, the third flashback is what really happened on that fateful night, as I described in the beginning of the video. But still, many with the knowledge that the second flashback is unreliable claim that the true events are still Luke acting out of character. So, to address this, let's look at what Luke's characterization actually is in the original trilogy. Audiences first met Luke Skywalker as a farm boy in A New Hope, desperate for more than his life is offering, as evidenced by the perfection that is the binary sunset. But unable to take this step himself, Luke is plunged into adventure via the droids and the execution of his aunt and uncle. This leads him to unexpected places, yada yada yada, challenging him in the cantina, and the Death Star, and the Falcon's turret, all of these building up Luke's skills as he's challenged. But his biggest conflicts and challenges in the film truly come with the loss of Ben Kenobi and the trench run. Luke is confident, skilled, and ready, but needs faith, which he places in the Force by turning off the targeting computer. This is the moment, and he takes the shot. We see that he has a good heart in his disappointment with Han when the smuggler was taking his reward and leaving, and his victory is won through faith, a faith that is challenged in The Empire Strikes Back. In Episode 5, Luke faces trials signified by him being placed upside down, his worldview inverted. He is not immortal and immediately faces the danger of the Wampa, which faith in the Force helps him escape, bringing us up to speed with the end of A New Hope. Then, on Dagobah, Luke's faith is once again tested by his idea of Yoda. The young man is humbled by Yoda's teachings, that war does not make one great, and that his eagerness needs to be tempered and supplemented with even more faith if he wants to truly raise the X-Wing. But during this training, Luke receives a vision of Vader with his face under the helmet, demonstrating what he could become if he killed Vader like he did in the vision, and subtly foreshadowing his true parentage. But he also has a vision, while upside down, of Han and Leia in a city in the clouds.
I saw a city in the clouds. They were in pain.
It is the future, you see.
Future?
As Yoda explains that the Force can unlock visions of other things, including the future. Luke is deeply worried by this and leaves Yoda before his training is complete, despite the old master's warning. Luke then heroically arrives on Bespin and goes to face Vader in the abyss of the carbon freezing chamber. He is brave, confident, and ready, raising his saber to fight the Dark Lord, and doing so rather well. But as Luke is beaten back more and more, he reaches the end of his abilities, and the walkway. This is when his fears are realized and his identity is challenged. Vader didn't kill his father. Vader is his father. But it's not just that. It's the fact that he is Vader's son. This shakes Luke to his core, as he leaves with a wound, humbled but ready for what's next. And then in Return of the Jedi, Luke arrives on the scene more confident than we've ever seen him, but with a sense of mastery to him that we haven't seen before. He's a true knight now, expressing a level of competence through his actions that doesn't line up with his mental state. Mentally, Luke is rapidly descending to his lowest across this film, caring for his friend while approaching the dark side in a collision with destiny. Shaken by his relation to Vader and intent on rescuing Han, Luke has begun dipping into the dark side, using the Force for his own personal gain, climaxing on the Death Star 2. There, challenged by the Emperor and goaded on by Vader's threats against Leia, Luke strikes against his father, revealing a mechanical arm like his own and a cowering man. In this moment, realizing the error of his ways, Luke turns off his lightsaber and refuses to slay his father to the Emperor's chagrin. Palpatine tries to kill Luke but is disposed of by Vader, a light within him rekindled by the love of his son. Luke has a final discussion with his father, who clarifies that Luke already saved him in his final moments, before passing away. Luke then returns to his friends to celebrate the victory, looked on upon in joy by his teachers and his father. This is Luke Skywalker's entire journey across the original trilogy, but what does it tell us about him? Luke is kind, relentlessly so, but also begins his journey impatient and energetic. Humbled by challenges, he becomes more and more skilled, yet faces more demons, but never stops seeing the light in others and valuing them. The most evil man in the galaxy, Luke saw there was still good in him and chose love over hate, saving him. This is Luke Skywalker's character, and it leads to what I often see claimed about what he's revealed to have done in The Last Jedi, and how it interacts with his last prominent appearance in Return of the Jedi. And part of that is intentional on Rian Johnson's part. The way Luke is framed in this shot of 8 absolutely reflects that of this shot in 6, and it's not just the subject, but the meaning too. Both are Luke looking at his hand, standing over someone, horrified of what he can do and what he's just done to that person. But for most people, the similarities end there. In 6, Luke is standing over a genocidal man who has been this way for over 2 decades now, who just credibly threatened his sister. Whereas in 8, Luke is standing over his 23-year-old apprentice, yes, he's 23 despite being described as a boy, who hasn't even done anything wrong yet. It's not a moment of combat, Luke isn't pressured by anyone else, and it's him looking into that person rather than that person telling him something. And when you frame it like this, yeah, it doesn't seem like something that the same Luke from episode 6 would do, at all. But I don't agree with this, when looking at it from a different point of view. Luke has always made rash decisions like what he does in episode 6 right before this shot, but I think a more comparable situation to what happens in 8 is what he does on Dagobah in episode 5. Luke receives a vision of a city in the clouds. His friends are in danger, and upon learning that, he abandons his training and any of his self-control despite Yoda's warnings. Luke makes rash decisions like this when his friends are threatened. We know this of him, even when the vision is something abstract. And an abstract vision is not what he sees in episode 8's flashbacks. And Luke's rash decision to ignite his saber over Ben is 100% about the specific vision that he has when looking into Ben's future and mind. Now for the big question. What did he see? Here's what Luke says in the film. I saw darkness. I'd sensed it building in him. I'd seen it at moments during his training. But then I looked inside and it was beyond what I ever imagined. Snoke had already turned his heart. He would bring destruction and pain and death and the end of everything I love because of what he will become. So starting off, yes, Luke had seen darkness building in Ben during his training. This leads to another point later in the video, so we'll skip over it for now, acknowledging that it informed Luke's decision to enter Ben's hut that night, which I don't think is something Luke would do without having talked to Ben before, So claiming Luke only looked at night and didn't talk to Ben isn't really a valid criticism, but my claim that he probably talked to him beforehand is also pretty invalid, so we don't really know on that point. All we know about is this situation, and this is clearly a situation where Luke feels like he needs to peek behind the curtain. He says so himself, quote, "But then I looked inside, and it was worse than he could imagine." Luke establishes here that Snoke's manipulation had turned Ben's heart. And then, most importantly, Luke says that Ben will, quote, "bring destruction and pain and death and the end of everything I love because of what he will become." If we're interpreting this as I believe the film intends us to, that seems like a vision of the future. To look even further, the film's novelization says, Luke's eyes remain shut, but he can see fire and ruin and the sightless eyes of the dead, and he can hear screams and the howl of lightsabers, and the roar of explosions. Darkness expanding from this slim, dark-haired boy to shroud everything, and the cacophony of terror that will accompany it. Luke has a vision of Ben's future, the future. So extrapolating from that and what Luke is described as hearing and seeing, this is important, Luke sees the deaths of Han, Leia, all of his students, kids he's trained from a young age. And if we want to go further, I think this is logical as well. It's not a stretch to say that Luke saw the destruction of Hosnian Prime in his vision too. The crumbling of the New Republic. The deaths of billions all because of his nephew. And then looking back to Empire Strikes Back and knowing Luke's characterization in the original trilogy and how he changed across it, I think Luke igniting his saber in an instantly regretted moment of pure instinct after seeing the deaths of Han, Leia, his students, the New Republic, and more is completely rational. He would do that, and I don't quite understand claiming that he wouldn't. A vision like that has come to him before, and it came true. 2 times if you want to count that. Luke knows from previous experience in the original trilogy that his visions do come true, making it all the scarier. But while it's understandable, there's no rejoicing in this choice either. Not even for a moment. The novelization says, "But then he looks at Ben and the brief, almost unwilling thought is gone. He cannot bring his lightsaber down on his sister's son while he sleeps." To address the differences between Luke's actions in Episode 6 and Episode 8, and the criticism that it doesn't make sense because Luke is in a peaceful situation in Episode 8 while he ignites his blade, rather than in combat like in Episode 6, I think Luke's all-encompassing vision is sufficient, along with the fact that Luke saw light in Vader because it was there. Vader was very conflicted. Luke knows this based on their walkway discussion earlier in the film. Ben is another case completely. He's not conflicted. His heart is dark. Now, some may say that this is something Luke should have seen past, seeing the light even in those completely consumed by darkness, and I see what you mean. That's probably why it was an instantaneous decision that was immediately regretted. He didn't go nearly as far as he did in Episode 6. This is what he does before he decides to stop in that movie. So to describe Episode 6 Luke as having more restraint than Episode 8 Luke just feels laughable to me at least. And in regards to Luke's fleeing to Ahch-To, after this, arguably a more out-of-character decision, I think it actually kinda works too. Luke knows his visions come true, and knows what he saw, and in a self-fulfilling prophecy in Luke's mind, him seeing that future and reacting is what causes that future. Luke blames himself. He knows what the future holds and just wants to die. I get it. You know, that actually sounds pretty funny in the script. I didn't realize that. But anyway, it's very sad and an extremely unfortunate circumstance for our old hero to find himself in. But I think it's consistent with his previous characterization when you look at it from Luke's own point of view. Now, I don't think this is all perfect. I wish we saw what Luke saw, rather than just hearing about it and hearing some sound effects. Show us Han's death, Starkiller, or maybe even Ben slaying students. It's not hard to believe that Luke might have even visualized himself inside his vision, about to fight back. The subjectivity of it could have been shown on screen or even described, but alas, it was not. Though I do think that in a simplistic way, the word everything is kinda sufficient. But now comes the second part of this argument. Why did this happen at all? What precedent is there for the shocking twist after the end of a hero's journey? Was it done just to make it interesting? Even the often memed subverting expectations? Well, there's more to it, I think. Luke's story in Episode 8 is far too similar to the later years of King Arthur for it to just be a coincidence to me. Arthur's later years are documented in several chivalric Arthurian tales, but the broad strokes, especially inspired by the Italian La Tavola Rotonda, are that Arthur is betrayed by his incestuous nephew and young knight Mordred, whom he fights at Camelon, where he is mortally wounded, dying on the magical island of Avalon. And with the mythological comparisons frequently drawn between the Skywalker saber and Excalibur, I think this is a fitting and tragic end for Luke. Beyond mythology, I think this arc also just resonates with me in that it's about apology and acceptance of one's failure. Luke shows up to save the day, embodying the teachings of the Jedi perfectly in one final action, all to say that he's sorry, and that he and Han will always be with Ben. But there's also a meta-narrative to what happens to Luke in Episode 8, and that's one that reflects the prequels and the fan reaction to them. If Luke is a self-insert for the fans of the original trilogy, then him losing faith in the Jedi and describing their legacy as failure feels a lot like what a fan of the Jedi or even Star Wars would feel after seeing what, presumably from Johnson and many others' points of view, was a negative depiction of the Jedi Order or simply movies they didn't like. Thus, The Last Jedi is a revelation that the Jedi's failure in the prequels is something educational, rather than something to be scorned, or that the prequels are something to be moved on from, and that Star Wars can still be cool in a new way. Luke comes to terms with this same thing and moves on. I think that's cool, but none of that out-of-universe stuff really matters here. What matters is that Luke's decisions before the events of The Force Awakens make sense if you view them through his eyes. What he saw, what he felt, and the ways he's been characterized in the past. But still, of course, it's not perfect. What we really need to see more of are Luke and Ben's adventures. I made a whole video about this that you should check out. Luke says that he saw darkness rising in Ben in moments during his training. What were those moments? That feels really important. In my perfect world, The Last Jedi would be pretty much the same, but The Force Awakens would be significantly more focused on the fall of Ben and Luke's academy, thus giving us good Master Luke and declining student Ben, giving more context to their relationship in The Last Jedi. This theoretical Episode 7 could even leave the events of Ben's hut on that fateful night a mystery, preserving 8's reveal. But as it stands, I still like both films, and all of the sequels at that. Yes, even you, Little Rise of Skywalker, warts and all. Now I'd really love to hear your thoughts on Luke's arc in these movies and what the flashbacks actually mean considering the broader context of his character, and not just the fact that he forgave Vader. There's a lot more than that. But anyway, thank you so much for joining me on this journey. For today's reading recommendation, I gotta go with The Last Jedi's novelization. I know citing a novelization to pinpoint things about the film is kind of considered cheating in arguments like this, but I really don't think it's that bad to do when it really expands upon the ideas that are present in the screenplay, like I did earlier. But anyway, you should seriously read this thing too. Jason Fry's writing prose is incredible, and I know several people that didn't like The Last Jedi that much that came out of this novelization liking the film quite a bit more. So if you do read it, please let me know.